You said this morning then that the separate selves forgets, and therefore the attention goes to the objects, and this is what happens then. I just I'm not so good in English.
Okay.
So I just want to understand clearly what happens, that because that I tried to answer this for myself in the pause, and there was an impulse that it's really, like you said, it's something natural to express. But when you why does it happen that you forget it when you are too long in the separate self? So you forget your home, you forget the source, because and then you are lost in the in the world, and you forget, and you have to come back to remember, and this is why. Yeah.
The essential nature of consciousness is infinite. Something that is infinite can only know the infinite. It's not possible for something that is infinite to know something that is finite. And by the same token, it is not possible for something that is finite to know the infinite. Infinite consciousness can only know infinite consciousness. The finite mind can only know the finite mind. So, if consciousness wants to know something other than its own infinite being, it must dress itself up as the finite mind. As the finite mind, it can know the finite world. However, there's a payoff. It's a sacrifice. Because in order to appear in the form of the finite mind and thus know the world, it has to cease knowing its own infinite being. Yes? In other words, what is your name?
Astrid.
Astrid. So, imagine Astrid falls asleep in Amsterdam. So Astrid's mind, in this analogy, is consciousness. So Astrid's mind wants to know the streets of Paris. She wants to experience the streets of Paris. But she's in Amsterdam. What does she do? She falls asleep in Amsterdam and dreams that she is Angela in Paris. Yes? Astrid has to forget or overlook the nature of her mind in order to be able to dress up as Angela. As Angela, Astrid can know the streets of Paris because she's dreaming that she is Angela on the streets of Paris. Now, from Angela's point of view, the streets of Paris seem to appear outside of her. They seem to be made out of stuff called matter. So when Angela looks inside, she thinks everything is made of mind. And when Angela looks outside on the streets of Paris, she thinks everything is made of matter. In other words, my experience is partly an inside self, made out of mind, and partly an outside world made out of matter. That's how Angela experiences the streets of Paris. However, Angela and the streets of Paris are just a localization within Astrid's mind. From Astrid's point of view, both Angela and the streets of Paris are made out of her own indivisible mind. So from Astrid's point of view, there is no distinction or separation between Angela's on the inside, Angela's self on the inside, and Angela's world on the outside. It's all made out of one seamless, intimate, infinite stuff. Yeah. But in order to experience the streets of Paris, Astrid has to overlook the knowing of her own mind. Yeah, so consciousness is Astrid's mind in this case. In order to know the finite mind, consciousness has to cease knowing its own infinite self. And it does that by localizing itself as the body. That is why each of us now seems to experience the world from the perspective of a body. And just like Angela on the streets of Paris, we now think, I am inside this body as the mind, and I am experiencing a world outside the body made of matter. But going back to the dream, Angela's mind is just a localization. Angela's finite mind is a localization of Astrid's infinite consciousness. In other words, the stuff with which Angela knows her experience is Astrid's infinite consciousness.
And when I...
So let me just complete the... So Astrid has freely fallen asleep. She's freely given up the knowing of her own infinite being in order to experience the streets of Paris. Yes. Now, there is a crack in Angela's world. There is a fault line in Angela's world. Because Angela is not totally happy on the streets of Paris. Behind and woven into Angela's experience in Paris is this longing for peace, this longing for happiness. And Angela on the streets of Paris tries to fulfill that longing through all kinds of substances, objects, activities, states of mind, and relationships. And none of them quite work. So at some stage, Angela in Paris ends up at a non-dual meeting. And in the non-dual meeting, Angela's friend says to her, don't worry about all the objects and substances and relationships. Ask yourself, what is the nature of the knowing with which you know your experience? And Angela's mind at that moment ceases directing itself towards the object and begins to inquire, what is the knowing with which I know? And Angela is tracing, without realizing it, the mind begins to sink into the heart. The eye is tracing its way back. And the friend gives her a hint and says, go to that in you called I. Go through the doorway called I, or I am. And Angela's mind begins to look for that. But as Angela's mind passes through that doorway, she wakes up as Astrid in Amsterdam. Oh, I wasn't Angela's finite mind. I wasn't suffering on the streets of New York. I veiled myself with my own creativity in order to experience the streets of New York. And in doing so, I gave up my happiness. I gave up my freedom in order to experience the world. But now I have reclaimed my freedom by returning to my true nature. So why does consciousness assume the form of the finite mind? As I said before, just out of an impulse of love to experience the infinite possibilities within it. But it comes at a price, because when it manifests as the finite mind, it seems to become a self in the world. It forgets that the world is a manifestation inside it. So that is why for the separate self there is something to do. It has to trace its experience back and discover its the original nature of its mind, the essential mind of pure consciousness.
And as Astrid in Amsterdam, I can then know that I am or I was Angela in Paris, and it was my...
Yes, and the next night you can be Antonia in New York, and the next man you can be Jane in Tokyo, and you can be...
But knowingly.
But knowingly, yes. So you start lucid dreaming. Astrid starts lucid dreaming.
Yeah.
So the waking state becomes a kind of lucid dream in which, although we're still subject to the appearance of being a self in a body, knowing made out of mind, knowing a world made out of matter, we still seem to experience, because consciousness still needs to appear to limit itself in order to experience the world. It does so knowingly. So there's no attempt to stop this appearance happening. We don't have to get rid of the appearance. But we know that both the inside self, made out of mind, and the outside world, made of matter, are not actually two separate substances. They are made of the same single, seamless, intimate, indivisible substance called consciousness. And every time Angela, on the streets of New York, experiences love, or beauty, or peace, or happiness, although she doesn't realize it, that is an intervention of Astrid's infinite consciousness into her finite world. So the experience of love, or beauty, or peace, or joy, or happiness is an intervention of eternity in time, an intervention of God's infinite being into the finite mind. That is why all separate selves love beauty and peace and happiness and love. In fact, that's all the separate self ever wants. Have you ever truly desired anything other than peace or happiness or love or beauty? No. In other words, all Angela really wants in life is not the object, the substance, the relationship. What she really wants is to be divested of her limitations and to realize her essential nature as Astrid, who is just peacefully lying in bed. Consciousness is always peacefully lying in bed, dreaming up the world.
Yeah.